Okay, well, thanks very much, everybody, for coming, and a special thanks to Donald Cameron, MSP, who is the Conservative Shadow Secretary, Cabinet Secretary for the Constitutional, External Affairs and Culture. I always think an extraordinary portfolio in terms of the breadth it covers. Anyway, so before I introduce Donald properly, just a few little kind of household details, so to speak. As you know, because this is the second in a series of discussions or conversations, interviews with the party, the five main parties represented in Holyrood about Europe. And we had Sarah Boyack, as you know, a couple of weeks ago, and Donald is the second. And then our next one will be Christine Jardine, who is actually an MP, and she will be speaking for the Lib Dems later this month. And can I just ask you all, please, to put your questions in the Q&A, which I will kind of monitor as we go along. And I would hope that we could have about 30 odd minutes for Q&A at the end. Towards the end, and we will finish pretty well on the dot around at 6:30. So we've got about an hour. Anyway, as I say, thanks very much, Donald, for coming along. Very pleased to have you. You are, I gather, originally from Achnacarry in Loch Harbour, and you got a first in modern history at Oxford, and then worked, this is very interesting, at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, DC. Very apt in terms of the obviously now, with the absolutely pretty tense geopolitical situation we're facing. And this is a think tank, obviously, specializing in international relations. And then you returned to the UK to study law. Not quite certain where, but qualified anyway. You, as an advocate at the Scottish Bar in 2005, and practiced across Scotland, focusing on, this is also interesting, public, agricultural and crofting law, your office says. And you've appeared in the Court of Justice of the European Union. We had on, Ian Forrester, QC, recently, the last British judge at the CJEU. The Supreme Court, both houses of the Court of Session and the Scottish Land Court. And you first elected to the Scottish Parliament to represent the Highlands and Islands in 2016. And you were subsequently re-elected last year. And so following this last election, you were elected to serve as a member of the Constitution, Europe, External Affairs and Culture Committee. And indeed, you are now the Shadow Cabinet Secretary thereof, therefore, for that very topic, anyway, for that portfolio. So can I just first start off by asking Donald, what actually brought you into politics? What made you quit? Well, I mean, I don't know if you quit the bar, you haven't quit the bar, so to speak, but anyway, you jumped into the political arena from the legal one. And what prompted that?
Well, firstly, David, thank you very much for having me, and to your members for joining tonight and listening. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and engage in, I hope, a constructive discussion. So what brought me into politics? A number of things. I mean, I'd always been interested in it, also the sort of political antennae, I suppose, and having studied history, I studied a lot of political history, which sort of piqued my interest. I also had sort of family members involved in politics, so was able to do kind of work experience.
You weren't any related to the former Prime Minister?
No relation. No,
he does have some Highland connections.
Well, he does actually, and he's probably, I think, he's probably like my 8th, 9th cousin or something.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But like very distant.
Yeah. Right.
Although Sarah Boyack actually referred to me as David Cameron in the chamber of the Scottish Parliament the other day. By mistake. So, but no, and that was I suppose one of the reasons as you said, after leaving university, I went and worked in Washington DC for a think tank that specialized in international relations, which in itself was fascinating. It was a strange time insofar as it was a kind of the sort of dying days of the Clinton administration. It was before 9/11. It was a very different sort of world in terms of international relations, but it was intriguing. And I also found American politics, domestic politics, very interesting as well. And I moved from that think tank to the BBC's bureau in Washington, working in I have to say, a very menial role as an intern there. But it was when George Bush was running against John McCain in the primaries, which was a really, absolutely riveting contest. And that certainly kind of, underlined or reinforced my interest in politics. And then, as you said, I came back to the UK, qualified as a barrister first in London, and then moved straight up to the bar in Scotland to practice. Right. And stood a couple of times in various seats where I didn't have much hope of being elected.
The famous unwinnables.
The famous unwinnables, exactly. But had great experiences. And then, I suppose many people, the referendum in 2014, I think, sort of rekindled my interest in politics and in Scottish politics. Not on a personal level, I got married in 2009 and had children, so I had stepped back from it a little for sort of personal reasons. But then, like many people, got re-energized by that debate and stood in the 2015 general election, and then, as you said, got elected in a 2016 Scottish election.
Can I just interrupt now and just ask, going back to your experience in Washington, which obviously was quite marked for you, very important period. Would you describe yourself as a transatlanticist, or would you describe yourself as a European, or how do you feel, or would you say that a Highlander first, a Scot, a Brit?
I suppose
where do you fit into this? A citizen of the world, who knows? As Theresa May once said, rather kind of witheringly.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the answer to that is both, and I think I'm very conscious of multiple of being happy with having multiple identities. One of my and he was a great friend, Charles Kennedy, who hailed from my part of the world in the Highlands.
Yeah.
So I remember him saying to me, I stood against him in an election, and I remember him saying it to hustings, I'm a Highlander, I'm a Scot, I'm a Brit, and I'm a European. And he I think the sense that you can have multiple identities, and add to that an Atlanticist, if you like, I'm entirely comfortable with that, and I think it's important that people aren't forced to choose. Having that American experience definitely, I find myself in that Atlantic tradition, I suppose, of trying to sort of feeling that we share a lot of qualities and interests with American friends. That said, I do remember thinking, just on a very sort of basic level, when I was in Washington, culturally, I do think that Britain, notwithstanding American culture and film and music and all the things we know and literature, I do think that in Britain, we stand closer to Europe than we do to America. And I felt that very keenly. I think that I remember leaving America in I think it was 2000 when I came back, and whether it was just football or European travel or whatever it is, I very much remember feeling that at the time. Although that doesn't mean that our links with America aren't important.
Of course. But how do you think this is now? Because, well, obviously, we're now living this dreadful period, and you mentioned it before we kicked off publicly, about seeing Ukrainian officials today in the parliament. But how do you think what's been the impact, you think, of the war in Ukraine on Britain's relations with Europe and Scotland's relations with Europe as well, if we want to be sort of particular, home in on that. I mean, a lot of us, for example, think, not just a lot of us, but a lot of commentators think that in many ways it's funny enough, it's brought the 6 years after the Brexit vote, effectively, it's brought Europe and specifically the EU, and in a way, made it more popular in a way, and also here, and also actually in some sense made the kind of our relations with it potentially better or potentially. What's your feeling of it?
I think it's a very interesting question. I mean, I think just before we leave America, because I think that this plays into it a bit. I think that the Trump years, certainly notwithstanding relations between the main players, I think the Trump years did see America retreating, isolating itself in a way that I suppose pushed Britain away a little and towards Europe. I think that has been reversed quite significantly by the current president, Biden.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important part of the picture. But I think turning to Ukraine, I agree with you. I think that the Brexit years and the negotiations around the withdrawal agreement and the trade and cooperation agreement and ongoing, right into the Northern Ireland Protocol, which remains problematic and requiring a solution. I'm actually slightly more hopeful now than I was 6 months ago in relation to that. But
because of the change of
I think the change of personnel. Yes, I think the change of personnel. I think the need for a pragmatic solution, and I think will drive that. But that's a side issue, an important side issue. But I agree. I think the kind of immediate tensions in Europe have dissipated. I suspect they were dissipating before the Ukraine situation developed, but undoubtedly, the EU has, in a kind of quite radical way, changed its foreign and defence policy almost overnight. Particularly, the German view of defence spending on Nord Stream 2. And other aspects, and the EU has absolutely, and I think the EU has the ability of the EU to act in a very quick and agile way, in concert with other non-EU members, including Britain, America, Canada. Has is a model for the future in a way of close working. And I think one criticism that I've made before of the UK government is that I don't think much thought had gone into how the UK interacts with the EU in an issue like this involving military invasion and defense, questions of defense and security and foreign policy. I mean, a lot of thought had gone into trade relations and issues around that. But I think no one had really kind of thought about, well, how do we act together? We're all part of the continent of Europe. How do we act in a situation like that? And I think that there aren't many bright spots in the Ukraine crisis, but I think one of the things that it has done is forced the UK and the EU, to be honest, to think about their relationship. And I for my part hope that's a very close relationship. For me, it should be.
Well, how do you think? I mean, as a Scottish Conservative, how do you think one should? What are the implications of this, and how would you personally seek to improve relations between the UK, and the EU, or even between Scotland even and the EU?
So I'm one of these Scottish Conservatives who voted against Brexit. I was a Remainer, and whilst sorry that the result went the way it did, I've long come to terms with it and thought that the important thing is now to move forward use the opportunities that exist, and make something of it. There are undoubtedly challenges, there remain challenges, and we spoke about Northern Ireland, there are other issues. But I think we have to have a close working relationship with Europe. From a Scottish perspective, the Scottish government has a network of offices still within the EU. They work, some of them are based in UK embassies. And I think one interesting aspect of what might transpire is how those operations fit together. And obviously foreign affairs is reserved to the UK government, and but Scotland has always had an international footprint, has always had very strong relations with Europe. I don't need to say this to this particular audience, but the history of Scotland's relations with Europe through the centuries is clear. And I think that one of the interesting aspects of this going forward is how the UK effort and the Scottish international effort interact with each other, complement each other, and especially within the EU, where Scotland's interests are broadly the same, but I think there's a real opportunity, I suppose, what I'm saying for.
Well, there are some differences, of course, but I'm just intrigued by what you're saying, actually, because you talk about as a Remainer or a former Remainer, put it that way. Many of us, of course, in the European movement, I'm afraid, from your point of view, are unrepentant Remainers or Remoaners, as some people disparagingly say. What are the? I mean, has any of this made you think actually? I'm changing my mind. I think actually, making Brexit work it's not going to happen, and therefore, we have to seriously think again about our relations with the EU, maybe even further down the tracks. You're a relatively young man, even possibly further down the track to rejoining.
It hasn't, if I'm being honest. I totally acknowledge that that's probably not a view shared by many people on this call who will want to rejoin. But I ultimately, and I've said this many times, it's about respecting the result of the referendum. And for me, it's a democratic issue. The UK voted narrowly to leave, much to my regret, but it did vote narrowly to leave the EU. And the question was put to the people: should the UK remain a member of the EU? And the people answered no. And for me, it's about respecting that referendum result and trying to and recognizing the closeness of that result as well. And of course, in Scotland, we know that the more, whatever, I think it was 62-38. 62-38.
Yeah. I mean, actually, on that point, I mean, if you had a democratic vote today without some of the possible interference from certain people based in the Kremlin and others, there might be a different result, actually, if we have the same vote today. Might there not? Could you contemplate that?
I don't. I mean, that's a question I don't know, and I don't think any of us know. And I don't think that question is going to be asked. So, no. I mean, what I do feel very strongly is that I was in the 62% in Scotland, but the 38%. That is a significant figure. It's not 10%, and I think that it's almost at 38%. It's over a third of the Scottish electorate who voted to leave, and I think that's really important, because I think in many senses, and I felt this in the Brexit debates that we had in the Scottish Parliament, that their voice was rarely heard, and needed. I wasn't one of them, but it needed, their position needed advocates. And I don't, I think one of the, having done a lot of those Brexit debates in the Scottish Parliament and watched what happened in the UK Parliament, I did feel that they were rather silenced and needed representation. And I think a lot of them actually involved, were SNP voters. We know that
Right.
that a lot of people who voted.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, yeah, well, at least probably of that 38%, possibly 30% of that were probably SNP voters. In fact, you're right. They're in favour of independence, but not EU membership, because the EU is pooling sovereignty. It's not having complete sovereignty, as we know. But can you actually see? I mean, we were talking. I didn't really want to focus entirely on Brexit, but rather given what's going on in Mariupol and elsewhere. But well, I'll stick on that for the moment until to see what the questions are. What is the upside of Brexit? You talked about, talking about seizing the opportunities, well, you didn't talk about seizing opportunities, but using opportunities. For us, as let's be blunt, as the European movement in Scotland, we frankly can see no upside in Brexit at all. And I mean, if you're a farmer, if you're in hospitality, or across this kind of a pretty broad spectrum of Scottish of the Scottish economy, the Scottish economic, commercial sector, there's no upside at all. It's actually been disastrous.
So I don't accept much of that, if I'm being honest. I mean,
the figures are there.
I mean, I think there have been challenges, and there's certainly been challenges in some of the sectors that you mentioned. So I mean, my view is that if we look at COVID, for example, I think one of the issues is that we haven't had to contribute to significant new liabilities arising from the EU's response to COVID. We've directed our own spending, we've built up our own response, we've tailored that to domestic needs, through things like the furlough scheme and vaccine procurement, and I think there have been advantages. I mean, let me take one example. The Erasmus scheme and the Turing scheme, which a lot of people are sad to see the end of the Erasmus scheme, but the Erasmus scheme, I think I'm right in saying, it was limited to the EU, and I think the Turing scheme, one of its benefits is that it has a wider, an international, a much more international. I think that's a good thing. I mean, I do, that students will be able to have placements in across the world, and I think that's really interesting. But I'm not gonna gild the lily. I mean, there have been problems. I'm not.
There's not many people at Scottish universities are much in favour of Turing.
Except to say
I accept what you say. I mean, but also, a lot of the stuff talked about Turing, about how it's kind of much more open to, poorer people and
I think that's.
But I mean, actually, the Erasmus scheme was not an elitist scheme at all. The evidence isn't there. I mean, I can tell because I wrote a lot about it when I was a Brussels correspondent, and so anyway. But let's not kind of get into that. Let's think more clearly. Can we just go, because we have a limited time. It's already kind of nearly 6. Can we move on to? How do you think Europe and or the British government in particular has handled the Ukrainian crisis, which and the war? How do you think Europe has performed, and how do you think the British government has performed?
So I think the British government has performed well in most respects. I think that in terms of before the invasion happened, I think in terms of what was being done, in terms of supply of arms to Ukraine to help them well in advance, we're well in front of the curve on that, intelligence-wise. I think the UK government has led from the front when it comes to the international response. In sanctions, for example, I think it was a little slow to start, but we are now performing well in terms of in imposing a really strict sanctions regime. I think we have shown leadership when it comes to engaging directly with Ukraine and Ukraine government and President Zelensky. And I think the aid effort. I mean, we had evidence in the committee this morning that pointed to. I think that the Disasters and Emergency Committee has now raised something like 120 million pounds, and the compassion and generosity of people across Britain has been extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
On refugees, there's been an announcement today, which I think will speed things up. But I think we are behind the EU. I hope that the UK government acts more quickly.
Well, do you think seriously we should actually? I mean, which is our position here at EMiS, that we should just adopt something similar to the Temporary Protection Directive, which the EU has adopted, and put into effect. I mean, I think actually our feeling too here is that the Scottish people certainly, and the British people as a whole, find that our hesitant approach to this has been little short of shocking, if not disgraceful. And as you said, because the figures of there's a clear willingness on the part of the Brits to give as much aid and to the Ukrainians, and as much solidarity to the Ukrainians as they possibly can. And this doesn't look very good. It's a bad ask.
Yeah, it doesn't look very good. I mean, I think I wouldn't go so far as to say that we. I think you need a visa scheme of some sort.
Why?
And you need some.
What do you need?
You need some kind of screening mechanism in terms of security and biometrics. But there are lots of questions about where how that is done, whether it should be done after people arrive. There are also important logistical issues, and I think that being able to do it digitally rather than someone having to travel miles to a UK immigration centre in Europe is a first step. But we definitely need to move quicker, and absolutely we need to. We need to accept this is the fastest growing refugee crisis since the Second World War. I mean, it's unique. It's absolutely unique in terms of what it asks, and I hope, I earnestly hope the UK government improves quickly, really quickly, its offering. Right.
Okay. Thanks very much on that. So just before I open up for questions from the audience as well, the Scottish Conservatives. This is a kind of an internal kind of domestic question, really political question. Scottish Conservatives were in the run-up. It seems ages ago now. I'm talking about Partygate. Were very critical of the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and distanced themselves. Your lead, Donald Ross, was particularly hypercritical of him, in fact, in his performance. Do you think what's happening and how the government has handled the conflict in the Ukraine changes that entire kind of perspective, and we can imagine Boris Johnson basically staying in power now for the foreseeable future, if not, until at least the next general election?
No, I'm not able to gaze into crystal ball, but I mean, what I would say, and I've said this in public before, is that I haven't changed my view of his conduct over that. But what I would say is that the Ukraine invasion has changed the political outlook, insofar as we're not in a war, but we are in a proxy war of some sort. Yeah. And he is the Prime Minister, he's the leader of the country, and at this moment he deserves our support. What will happen in the months to come, I don't know, but at the moment he deserves our support as the country's leader.
Right. Okay. So thank you very much. Right. So I think if we can move on to questions now, and there's a whole kind of series of related questions. I mean, starting first of all about the impact of Brexit on Scotland. You're being asked by Vanessa former chair of EMiS, I hasten to add that. Can you understand the sense of frustration, anger and loss felt by Scots residents at being removed from the EU against their will?
Absolutely. I can completely understand that and acknowledge that. And it's something that, I've good friends who are in different political parties who remain absolutely devastated by the result of the vote and see themselves as Europeans and are dedicated to it. And I completely accept and acknowledge that sense of grief almost that people feel when it comes to having left the EU. And I myself, as I say, we need to, I don't like the phrase we need to make Brexit work but I myself have come to I think personally a pragmatic decision that we have to move on, that it was a divisive moment in UK politics and make the best of it. And but that is in no way to downplay the sense of frustration that Vanessa speaks about and loss. And I'm in, and I represent the Highlands and Islands, so I for instance, there are issues of exports. We export a lot of shellfish, for example, exactly. So I know, absolutely, not just the sort of kind of personal, emotional issues, but also very real commercial consequences of it. That said, I think, in shellfish is quite a good example. I know I travel out to the Western Isles and you talk to sort of shellfish farms who are pragmatic and see opportunities for them. In North US, I met there's a farm there, for example, where they see, they think they have to make the best of this and try and use it as an opportunity for to sell into different markets, etc. The other thing I would say is that I think I think COVID, and now Ukraine, we have been buffeted by after Brexit by extraordinary events that just no one could have predicted, and there is a kind of whether it's the effect on the cost of living, or whether it's the effect on trade, or there are lots of factors now swirling around, including Brexit. And I don't want to diminish Brexit, but there are a lot of other factors that exist, and I think we have to acknowledge that.
Do you think? I mean, Graham Watson, who was a former leader of the Lib Dems in ALDE actually in the European Parliament as an MEP, and is now living in Scotland and elsewhere. He says, DC Donald Cameron, do you believe that leaving the EU makes Scottish independence more likely?
I don't. I mean, I'm very, very nervous about predicting what will happen and about future referendums, whatever. I mean, I think what it has shown is that there are huge dangers in leaving a union which let's be honest, Scotland's trade with the rest of the UK is huge. I mean, it's it's massive. There would be huge issues.
60%, isn't it?
Yeah. Exactly, the 60% figure. 60, I think it's 60 billion pounds worth of trade. And I think Brexit is also will throw up issues around the border. It makes issues around the currency much harder. So I actually think that Brexit shows the dangers of leaving an economic union and the risks involved. And I don't think it makes Scottish independence more likely, if I'm being honest. But I'm very loath to gaze into the crystal ball generally.
Yeah. Well, arguably, of course, we did leave an economic union in the sense of the EU, and there are very heavy risks involved in that, are there not?
Sorry, David, I missed that.
I said, arguably we did leave we were never, full-time members of the, obviously of the Eurozone. I'm not suggesting that, but we did leave a kind of economic union and a huge risk involved in that. So anyway, that's my, whatever. So another question being asked, going back to the question of asylum or refugees, that I'm being asked that is this not really more about the government disguising an essential reluctance? This is Tony O'Donnell, who used to work in Brussels, an essential reluctance to admit needy refugees with excessive bureaucracy and feigned muddle.
I'm just trying to read that comment. I
think the suggestion is, and it's one which people here have,
yeah,
is effectively we don't want a load of I mean, this is quite clearly the kind of, going back to the old hostile environment, and Priti Patel's particular apparent sort of this desire to effectively pull up the drawbridge. I mean, we're not very keen effectively on admitting certain types of immigrants or refugees or whatever it is to Britain. We're a less open place. We're a more intolerant. We've become, under this government in particular, we've become a much less open place than we were before. And I think it sticks to the craw, especially of a lot of Scots, because we like to think we're not like that.
It's a really interesting question. I mean, I think there are administrative issues in the Home Office that have existed, that exist, and an inability to ramp up systems that are required in a situation like that. And I think that's strange, because we had the Afghanistan crisis last year, and I think there are sort of practical problems that should have been solved but haven't been. And whether that's around digital security checks, whatever it is. But there's no doubt that the UK government have taken a much firmer line on immigration than perhaps previous Conservative governments. I mean, I think to be fair to the UK government, I think in terms of non-EU migration from other parts of the world, and perhaps at a sort of more skilled level, if we can phrase it like that, they've actually got quite a liberal immigration regime, and I think that's acknowledged by sort of independent commentators. Now, obviously, the EU migration is different, but I think it would that is a fair reflection. But I think you do wonder whether. I mean, one of the things I feel about the Conservative Party, or conservatism in general, is that in the past, one of its great strengths was that it was pragmatic. It concentrated on what worked. And I think one of the things that Brexit has done, and even before Brexit, is that conservatism has become more ideological, which I don't think is true to its roots, because I think it was always, we were always a party, as Michael Oakeshott, the famous conservative philosopher in the sort of mid-20th century, said, that concentrated on practical solutions and sort of national conversations and a rejection of ideology. And I think that there is a more ideological bent to the Conservative Party than
you don't think Thatcher was. I mean, she would dismiss you as a wet, I think.
Yes, she would. Yeah, but I'm very happy. I'm very happy to be dismissed like that. I mean, I would not have been a successful politician under Margaret Thatcher, but I mean, I just think I think coming back to immigration, I think that has infected some thinking within the Home Office, and I think that means that we are less I say that UK government. I'm not a member of that government, but I think that has mean we're less amenable to a sudden shift, in a gear shift that is needed in this situation. And I don't think you only have to look at the debates or at Prime Minister's questions. There are many people in the Conservative Party who feel that way. And I just hope that the announcement today is the precursor to a much quicker and, as I say, efficient, more liberal approach to the refugee crisis.
There's a related question here, Donald, which is Andy Wensing, who's asking the last one down here in a minute. Would you agree that the Scottish Conservatives cannot gain traction in Scotland again until English Brexiteers have seized control of decision making in the UK Parliament? The suggestion obviously being that the Conservative Party, if not here, down south, has become the Brexit Party, has become the English Nationalist Party, the English National Party, the ENP.
Yeah, I don't think that's entirely fair. I mean, there's definitely, I would definitely agree that the current cabinet is sort of dominated by people who supported Brexit, who supported the Prime Minister in the way that he negotiated the Brexit deal, the withdrawal agreement, and eventually the trade and cooperation agreement. And their voices have been louder recently, but there are also other voices who are pragmatic, who are perhaps more. They're right, and including I think the Prime Minister, and I think COVID has shown this. This is a government that has turned on its head there's preconceived norms of Thatcherite ideology in terms of state intervention. We have look at furlough or vaccine. We're seeing state intervention on a scale it's unheard of, and in terms of the national insurance rise
it's back to the 40s and 50s.
I mean, we are in absolutely. So I think it's not correct to sort of I think it's much more nuanced than simply characterizing the current UK government as an English nationalist party, and they are deeply committed to the union and to the United Kingdom continuing. And Michael Gove is someone who is acutely aware of that issue. So I find it I'd struggle to agree with the fact that they are an English national government.
But what about the notion? What about the notion, Donald, that actually they have, that post Brexit, and particularly with the Joint Ministerial Committee and the Shared Prosperity Fund and everything else, actually they have put at risk the devolution settlement of the late 90s, and that there is the kind of, it's not just the SNP saying this, that a lot of people do feel that there's been they are in a funny way putting the union itself at risk by assuming too many powers at Westminster, and by centralising, not at Westminster, actually in the government, in the executive, that the executive is becoming a little overmighty.
I mean, I don't accept that, but I also think that exactly the same charge could be levelled against the Scottish government, who have very centralising tendencies. Who and there are a lot of powers coming back to the Scottish Parliament, to the Scottish government, and they have a choice to make about to what extent they will devolve those powers down to local authorities. I actually think that if people, and it's often said, the levelling up or the Shared Prosperity Fund is undermining devolution. I don't accept that for 1 minute, because if you look back to the devolution settlement, there was there is nothing in a devolution settlement that says the UK government cannot fund directly devolved areas. And in fact, if you look at federal systems, quasi-federal systems across the world, if you look at Canada or Germany or Australia, you see the for want of a better word, federal government spending money in all sorts of areas in transport. So I generally think I think the UK government respects the devolution settlement, but I think there is nothing undermining of that by, for instance, in my part of the world, funding a community organisation to take over, a remote pub or something like that, which is what's happened.
do you seriously expect that the level of spending, the level, which was available under when we were members of the EU, under EU's kind of the social, structural funds of the EU, that under the shared prosperity fund, that will match that kind of level of funding? Because, I mean, some of the evidence so far isn't very, a lot of experts in the field suggest that it won't be. And one certainly knows that farmers, for example, are very, very worried that their own kind of levels of support will be diminished. I mean, it's quite astonishing how the Scottish and British farming community, you would have thought almost kind of natural conservatives, actually are very hostile to the government.
Well, on farming particularly, I mean, I think the UK government has committed to the funding envelope up to 2024, and I think the Scottish government have been very slow in coming forward with a new farming subsidy support program. And we've been asking them for years. As you said, 6 years since Brexit. We haven't seen any detail in terms of what the Scottish government want to do. So I think that's entirely fair criticism. I mean, I have said publicly in a debate, in fact, a week or so ago, that the commitment has been that structural funding has to replicate EU funding, and I think that will happen. I want that to happen, and and I fully expect that guarantee to be met by the UK government.
You do?
Yes, absolutely.
Even though the actual environment, the fiscal environment may not be as favourable now as it's, as you said yourself, you've got you've got a heavy state intervening chancellor now, who goes completely against his own instincts, one suspects, and I would imagine actually that the spending now during the war, well, we're not directly involved in the war as such, but as it were, will probably increase as well. I mean, and there's a lot of pressure on this government to, because of the cost of living crisis, to spend even more money. So, I mean, you may find it that your hopes will not become reality.
But a commitment has been made, and I believe it will be met. And I absolutely accept that we are going to, the economic shocks of the Ukraine crisis, not to mention the already existing cost of living issues, are going to have a profound effect on the economy. But I still expect that commitment to be made and met.
To be met as well. Okay, good. Thank you very much. There's another question related to the land, actually, coming from Anne, who says that how would you rectify? It's a very long question. I don't know if you can see it yourself in the Q&A. How would you rectify the situation where 86% of Scotland's population live on 6% of the land? What would you do to make land tenure more equitable, rebalance the population where Scots no longer need to leave their place of birth to make a living, and make the land fully productive towards meeting our own food requirements?
So, I mean, there's a long-running conversation about land reform in Scotland. I mean, as a party, we were, back in the 90s, we were the, I like to say, the trendsetters in terms of community ownership. We've long supported greater community ownership of land. We've also long supported greater transparency about who owns land, and that's reared its head again in the last week or so when it comes to sort of overseas entities owning land in not just Scotland but in the UK. I mean, we're supportive of very different models of land ownership, including community ownership, and you cannot represent the Highlands and Islands and not be in favour of community ownership of land. And I travel to places like Harris, Lewis, Carloway. You see some incredible community ownership models that exist that are fantastic. So long may that continue, and long may we move to a much more equitable distribution. I have to say, I think that there are, and I think the question Anne raises talks about population. I mean, one of the significant issues in the Highlands and Islands is depopulation and rural depopulation and people moving away and not coming back. And that's a massive issue. And a lot of that is around housing. And, I think one of the great sort of challenges of this parliament will be to try and solve this problem of affordable rural housing. Yeah, I think it's massive, because I think it's very difficult for young families to buy property, or even to rent property in some instances.
Would you go as far as the Welsh? I think the Welsh, it's not just Plaid, but actually the Welsh government and a lot of Welsh councils, whether run by the nationalists or not, are making it extremely difficult for second homeowners. I stand up here as one myself, to move in and take property. In other words, they would prioritize local people, and if necessary, subsidize their house purchase. I mean, how would you go about it yourself?
Well, I think there is no doubt that those who own second homes distort the market. I'm not in favor of a kind of policies that would penalize them unduly, or try and sort of in some way kind of fix the market. But because I don't think second homes is the problem. I think just availability of affordable housing is the problem.
Right.
But because if you look at, second homes it's certainly an issue. And if you look at some of the property sales, and if you small crofts in the Western Isles with a view of the sea sell for hundreds of thousands of pounds, and there's no hope for any locals to get in there. But so I think the problem is actually more about building affordable, energy efficient housing, finding places to do that, and getting on and doing it. Although I acknowledge that second homes is part of the problem, but I'm quite wary about going as far as perhaps the Welsh have done in terms of using economic levers that penalise second homeowners. I think that's going too far, because I just don't think that's where the nub of the problem is.
Yeah. Okay. Right. We're still coming towards the end. We've only got a few minutes left, actually. But so there's been plenty of questions, which unfortunately we won't be able to have time to go into all of them. So we've covered. And indeed, I'm surprised we've ended up discussing the kind of land question in Scotland and second homes and so on. But anyway, that's good. What would you? Can I just ask a sort of forward-looking question in a sense? Can you imagine yourself actually at some point becoming the cabinet secretary for the Constitution and External Affairs and Europe and culture and whatever else the portfolio is going to cover, which is everything? I mean, in other words, is there any possibility do you see for the Scottish Conservatives to actually win power, having been, 20 odd? Devolution. The Scottish Parliament has saved the Conservative Party from oblivion in Scotland. Actually, 97. You had no seats in Parliament, in Westminster Parliament at all, and 20 odd years later, you are now the second party in the Parliament. But can you imagine actually overtaking the SNP, forming the Scottish government?
Yes, and no one expected us to become the kind of second party in Parliament. I mean, we've exceeded expectations at every election, and in the last election last year, we got more votes than we've ever had, but by about 100,000 votes. So I think we are, and I also think the SNP government are tiring. They are now a decade and a half, into government. They are out of ideas. They don't have any energy about them, and I think that we are well placed to be a strong alternative to them when the time comes.
And will that be, as a kind of almost as it were not the branch office, which, as they referred to the Labour Party at one point, Scottish Labour, and look what it's done for them, but actually as a kind of much more distant, say, from the Conservative Party in England or Britain.
I mean, you touched on the sort of conversation that we have often, which is, you know, the relations between the UK government, UK party and the Scottish party. I mean, we have always had the ability to set our own policy. We've always had the ability to select our own candidates. We've always had the ability to raise our own money, and take distinctive positions. And you know, what better example of that is you know, Douglas Ross's view of you know, the Prime Minister over the last you know, few months. And I think, you know, that we've always been able to carve a distinct identity, and you know, I think people accept that and realize that. And I think that, you know, we share many values, you know, conservative values, with our colleagues in Westminster, but we also are a Scottish party, and we are a patriotic party, and one that acknowledges that solutions that may work in Westminster don't work, you know, at Holyrood. So you know, I think you know, and I don't want to get into the kind of debate about splitting off from the Westminster Party, but at the moment, I think we you know, we are in a position where we can develop a unique, a distinct identity and offering to the Scottish people that will reap benefits in the years to come.
Donald Cameron, thank you very much indeed, MSP. Thank you very much for coming along and talking to us. You know, it's been very enjoyable for me personally. I hope the audience has enjoyed it too. We had a lot of questions. A lot of them, I think, were answered during one way or the other during the course of our conversation. And I hope you do, you know, keep in touch, and you know, we'll be prepared to come along again in due course. And just to repeat what I said earlier, the next of these meetings will be on the webinars will be on the 23rd of March, when we have Christine Jardine, and we're hoping also to organise one on the French elections in April, you know, and the implications for you know, the Europe in particular, and European, you know, the summit today on basically peace and security and defence policy, and to follow up on that. Anyway, maybe you can take part in that too, who knows. Anyway, so thank you very much, Donald.
Can I thank you again? Thank you for all the interesting questions, and I apologise for not being able to answer them all, but yeah, really grateful, and hopefully we can meet in person at some point as well.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Yes, indeed.
Thank
you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
If you're there, Caitlin, thank you very much. You can go watch the chef now.